The UN Security Council has adopted a new resolution to sanction North Korea following its latest ICBM launch in November. Resolution 2397 aims to further cut oil supplies to the regime, repatriate North Koreans working abroad, and blacklist 16 individuals. Oh Jung-hee starts us off.
The UN Security Council unanimously imposed new set of sanctions on North Korea following its latest ballistic missile launch. Resolution 2397 comes 24 days after Pyongyang launched its Hwasong-15 ICBM in late November. It's the fourth UN resolution on Pyongyang this year and the 10th in the UN's history.
9 times before today, we have asked the North Korean regime to choose the path of peace. But Pyongyang has chosen the path of isolation. As we have in the past, we will continue to match the Kim regime's choice of aggressive actions with actions of international sanction.
The US-led resolution aims to ban nearly 90% of refined petroleum product exports to North Korea by capping them at 500,000 barrels a year. That builds on the previous resolution in September that set a limit of 2 million barrels. Crude oil exports to the regime have also been capped at 4 million barrels a year. The list of banned North Korean exports was extended to include food products, machinery, and electrical equipment, as well as certain stones and minerals. Also, all North Korean nationals working overseas will have to be repatriated within 24 months. And 16 individuals were added to the international blacklist, freezing their financial assets and banning them from travel.
Today, we have banned the import of nearly 90% of refined petroleum products to North Korea. These products are used by the regime to resource their illegal nuclear and ballistic missile programs. By cutting off this supply, we will restrict their ability to develop and deploy these weapons.
The new sanctions resolution is expected to have an even greater impact on the reclusive regime's already struggling economy by further restricting oil supply and curtailing the regime's remittance earnings from workers abroad.
Should the North Korean regime conduct another nuclear or ballistic missile test, this resolution commits the Security Council to take even further action. It sends the unambiguous message to Pyongyang that further defiance will invite further punishment and isolation.
That was U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations Nikki Haley earlier today after the UN Security Council unanimously voted to impose new sanctions on North Korea in response to the rogue regime's recent ICBM launch. That missile is said to be capable of hitting anywhere in the U.S. Aaron Cohen is a 21-year Israeli-trained security and counterterror veteran and the founder of Aaron Cohen's Soft Target Security Training Systems. Sir, thank you so much for joining us. You know, this is just 24 hours after the UN was down a completely different road, condemning the U.S. Today, stood together, all 15 members, and imposed these new sanctions, including China and Russia. How significant is that?
Well, it's really significant, and it's also ironic how the UN, as soon as their organization is threatened in any way by Pyongyang, like we're seeing here, they flip the script very quickly. But that's neither here nor there. This is very significant. The reason why is because North Korea is attempting, and in fact getting closer to being able to launch a ballistic missile, which can in fact hit our country. That's a very real thing, and so. The president, along with his National Security Council, laid out a security plan that does what you have to do with terrorists. And why do I call this guy a terrorist? Because a terrorist will fire at civilians unprovoked. That's what they do. Yeah. So how do you deal with them? You got to go for the neck. You got to bite down, and you got to make sure that they can't move and that they can't get access to their funding. And so the attack of the finances, and by restricting funding to North Korea through very hard sanctions, is exactly the security play that's required. So salute to Donald Trump, and I salute the woman who's at the UN making that announcement also. I think she's fabulous, and I think she's no nonsense. Yeah. And I love hearing her put it to the UN. It's absolutely my favorite thing I've been listening to in the last couple of days.
You know, not quite as far as President Trump wanted to go. He wanted to cut off all oil imports. This very dramatically limits them far below where they are right now, where they only had been reduced by about 30%. At this point now, they're almost gone. But he also wanted to have all foreign workers sent back to North Korea from everywhere else that they're working, which generates so much cash for the nation.
That's right. That's right. And by essentially what he's doing is he's creating choke points to the labor. And what that does is it essentially puts everybody on watch, which is, look, if you're going to export something to North Korea, if you're going to export goods there, if you're going to work and bring any kind of expertise back there, whether, as well as the oil, we're going to constrict, even though it's only 30%, like you mentioned, still billion or millions of barrels per day. And so, again, you deal with terrorism. Again, I'm coming from the Israeli perspective here. My unit never went after the low-level terrorists. We went after the management of the guys, the financiers, the money guys. No money, no terror. No millions of barrels exported here. No labor being able to carry out North Korea business. Again, by constricting or putting choke points, you are softening that terrorist.
I don't want to run out of time. I'm glad you brought up.
In the words of Yogi Berra, it's deja vu all over again. This now will be the 10th resolution dealing with North Korea's nuclear and missile program since 2006. The last resolution that was adopted was in September. This latest resolution is in response to the November 29th missile launch. Let me tell you some of the things that are in this resolution, but most notably you should be aware that the last resolution included sanctions and putting a cap of 2 million barrels for refined petroleum into North Korea. This new resolution reduces that now to 500,000 barrels a year. Other measures, it caps crude oil shipments to 4 million barrels a year. It requires that North Korean workers employed outside the country return immediately, and that has been a source of hard currency for North Korea. This new resolution will also allow for seizure of ships that are being used to circumvent sanctions. Additionally, Leland, this latest resolution, if it passes, the vote will be at 1 o'clock today, calls for high-ranking North Koreans as well as the Ministry of Armed Forces to put on a freeze, an asset freeze, and a travel ban. The vote, again, scheduled for 1 o'clock today. Not entirely clear yet if, in fact, China is on board. Leland.
Yeah, China always a key vote when it comes to North Korea with their veto. How effective are these sanctions going to be, David Lee, if they are indeed put into place?
Well, there seems to be no disagreement that North Korea is able to circumvent the sanctions. The question is to what degree. According to a recent report by the Institute for Science and International Security, as many as 49 countries to some degree were complicit in helping North Korea to find a way to work around the sanctions. 13 countries in some way helped North Korea violate the sanctions that dealt with military issues. And among those countries, we're talking about Cuba, Iran, Syria, and Egypt. Why? Well, many of those countries have very poor export controls, and there's also the issue of corruption. An additional 19 countries, Leland, help participate in some way or another of putting up shell or front companies. And among those countries, we're talking about China, Russia, and Iran. And lastly, it's worth noting here that North Korea is able to generate a significant amount of hard currency by hacking into financial systems. They've been able to get their hands on a significant amount of cryptocurrencies such as Bitcoin. They've also been able to hack into private accounts as well. They have 1,700 staffers on staff doing hacking round the clock.